John stared intently at the divorce papers in front of him. His hand, trembling, hovered over the signature. He just won millions in the lottery, a fortune that could change his life. But instead of sharing the news with Sarah, his wife, he decided to ask for a divorce. He wanted it all for himself, without her ever knowing. The silence in the kitchen was stifling, but John believed he was in control. What he didn't know was that the secret he was keeping was about to destroy everything. This is a story about betrayal and greed. Stay until the end and see how the truth always finds a way out, and how justice is sometimes more ruthless than we expect. John had always been the perfect example of the hard-working Brit, a man who left home before the sun was up, face worn out and hands rough from years of hard graft. He spent his days on building sites, surrounded by the clatter of machinery and the smell of fresh concrete. His life, though tough, was predictable. He liked it that way. He knew that when he got home, Sarah would be there. His wife, his partner of nearly 20 years, the one who'd always stood by him through the hardest of times. Sarah, for her part, had her own daily battles. She kept the household running, managed the finances with strict care, always watching every penny. It wasn't a luxurious life, but they'd always had enough to get by. There was a kind of automatic routine between them. Sarah would make dinner, John would sit at the table, exhausted. They'd speak little, but there was an unspoken calm between them. It wasn't a passionate marriage, but it was solid. Yet for John, that simple life no longer seemed enough. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, a void he couldn't quite name. Some days he'd look at Sarah and wonder if this was really the life he wanted. The little joys from before, the smell of coffee in the morning, the soft touch of Sarah brushing past him in the kitchen, didn't bring the same satisfaction anymore. And he couldn't figure out why. Then the lottery ticket came along. A ticket he'd bought without much thought, almost out of habit. And when the numbers came up, he could hardly believe it. He'd won millions. His life could change in the blink of an eye. The weight of bills and the grind of daily life seemed to vanish in seconds. But instead of sharing the news with Sarah, something darker began to grow inside him. That money's mine, he thought. I bought the ticket. I deserve it. Why should I share it with her? John, a man who'd always been loyal and honest, was now being slowly consumed by a quiet and dangerous ambition. Winning the lottery didn't just bring John wealth, it brought a decision, and with it, the darkness of greed. He started to scheme, figuring out how to keep the money hidden from Sarah. With each passing day, the distance between them grew, like an invisible chasm widening through the house. Over the following weeks, John's behavior changed in subtle ways, but Sarah, who knew him better than anyone, quickly sensed something was off. He no longer spoke to her about the small things in life. The nights they'd usually share a glass of wine, even in silence, were now replaced by excuses. I've got to work late, I'm tired, I'm going out for a walk. She'd catch him lost in thought, staring into the distance, as if planning something he couldn't share. What's he hiding? Sarah wondered, as a knot of anxiety began to form in her chest. It wasn't a sudden change, but slow and steady, as if John was being pulled away from the life they'd built together. The silence between them, once comfortable, now felt heavy, laden with uncertainty. Meanwhile, John was lost in his own thoughts. He was trying to figure out how to keep the fortune from Sarah without raising suspicion. He didn't want the simple life they'd had anymore. He wanted to start over somewhere else, far from the responsibilities and limitations of marriage. If I ask for a divorce now, I can walk away with everything. She won't suspect a thing. The plan began to take shape in his mind. He'd file for divorce without ever mentioning the lottery. Sarah would think it was just a hard decision from a worn-out marriage. He could say he wanted something new, needed space. The money, the real reason, would stay hidden, untouched. It'll be easy, he told himself, trying to convince himself that Sarah wouldn't notice. But the more he tried to hide, the more Sarah sensed the shift. She started to notice the signs, the excuses, the distance, the way John would avoid her gaze when they talked about the future. Something was wrong, and she knew she'd have to find out what it was. The distance between John and Sarah, which once seemed like a temporary discomfort, had now turned into an insurmountable wall. Sarah felt the growing emptiness around her, and every gesture from John seemed to carry a guilt he could no longer hide. He was colder, more absent, as if his mind was elsewhere. And it was. John had already secretly consulted a lawyer, gathered the documents, and was now just waiting for the right moment to hand Sarah the divorce papers. He imagined it would be simple. She might cry, maybe protest, but in the end, she'd accept it. In his mind, it was a perfectly crafted plan. He would walk away with the money, and Sarah would never know that fortune even existed. But there was one thing he hadn't predicted. Sarah wasn't as naive as he thought. One evening, noticing John's inexplicable distance, Sarah confided in her longtime friend Emma. Over coffee, Sarah poured out her concerns. "He's acting strange, Emma. It's not just work stress, it's something else. He's not the same anymore." Emma listened carefully, and though she tried to reassure her friend, there was something about John's behavior that troubled her too. "Have you considered that he might be hiding something?" Emma suggested, hesitantly. "Maybe it has to do with money. You heard about that lottery ticket that was won around here, didn't you?" Sarah hadn't made that connection before, but suddenly something clicked in her mind. Emma's words echoed in her thoughts. John had never mentioned the lottery, but now, the possibility that he was hiding something more serious than just marital problems started to take shape in her head. Sarah realized she could no longer ignore her instincts. It was time to take action. She started paying attention to every detail, every little move John made, and slowly, the pieces began to fall into place. He spent hours away from home, but couldn't explain where he'd been. The nervousness he showed whenever she brought up financial matters. The secretive glances at papers he guarded so carefully. His behavior wasn't just distant, it was suspicious. That's when Sarah turned to her niece, Amelia, a sharp and determined young lawyer. After hearing the story, Amelia immediately sensed something much bigger was going on. She offered to investigate, using her connections to uncover what was behind John's odd behavior. Sarah accepted her help, torn between fear and hope. She wanted the truth, but she dreaded what she might find. While John continued with his plan, completely unaware of Sarah and Amelia's investigation, the tension at home became nearly unbearable. Their conversations were short and formal, their interactions mechanical. But Sarah kept a calm exterior. She knew the truth was close, and she was preparing herself for the moment when it would all come to light. Amelia worked tirelessly for days and finally uncovered what Sarah had feared. John had indeed won the lottery. The winning ticket, the plan to hide the money, it was all there, laid bare. Sarah was deeply shocked, but not entirely devastated. She had been bracing herself for something big, and now that she had the confirmation, her resolve only grew stronger. "He thought he could deceive me, but I won't let him get away with it," she thought, determined to fight back. But Sarah didn't want to confront John directly. Not yet. She knew that wouldn't be enough. She wanted to expose his greed in a way he'd never forget. Sarah felt the weight of the truth in her hands, knowing that John, the man she'd shared nearly half her life with, had plotted everything in the shadows. Hiding his victory, his greed, left a deep scar. But she didn't let the shock turn into despair. With Amelia by her side, Sarah devised a plan to deal with John in a way he'd never see coming. While John continued acting as though nothing had changed, Sarah played the same game. She didn't confront him right away. She kept up her daily routine, cooking dinners, going to the shops, maintaining an eerie sense of normality. John, blinded by his own confidence, believed his plan was working. He thought Sarah wouldn't suspect a thing. To him, the divorce was only days away. But now, Sarah was in control, and every move she made was carefully calculated. "He thinks he's going to get away with it," she thought. But little does he know, the game's already changed. Amelia, with her legal expertise, helped Sarah gather all the necessary evidence. Each silent night Sarah spent with John, she mentally prepared for the moment of truth. John, completely unaware of what was about to happen, continued to pressure her. In every brief conversation about the future, he hinted that maybe it was best if they parted ways, that the marriage wasn't what it used to be, that they needed a fresh start. Sarah listened, but inside her anger only grew, not at the thought of divorce itself, but at the betrayal, the cowardice, the manipulation. And now, knowing that he wanted to leave without her ever glimpsing the truth, the betrayal felt all the more brutal. Amelia then suggested a decisive move, to schedule a divorce hearing as soon as possible. John, relieved that Sarah seemed not to be resisting, agreed immediately. He saw the arrangement as his ticket to freedom. Little did he know that he was walking straight into his worst nightmare. A few days before the hearing, Amelia uncovered something even more devastating: a secret offshore account where John had hidden most of his winnings. This was the final nail in the coffin. He truly believed that, even if the truth came out, Sarah would never find that money. He was more confident than ever. Finally, the day of the hearing arrived. John, dressed in a new suit, a reflection of the life he imagined starting soon, walked into the courtroom with a cold confidence. Sarah, however, was calm. With Amelia by her side and the evidence in hand, she was ready. John gave her one last look, as if victory were assured, but Sarah's expression was unreadable. Throughout the hearing, John remained composed, pretending to be a man worn out by a difficult marriage, trying to justify his decision with hollow words about emotional distance. But what he didn't expect was that Amelia, in a perfectly calculated move, would expose every detail of his plan, from the lottery winnings to the offshore account. When she presented the evidence, John's confident facade crumbled. His face turned pale, his eyes wide, unable to hide his shock. Sarah locked eyes with John as the truth was revealed. "You thought you could fool me, that I'd be the same woman you underestimated all these years. But you were wrong." The courtroom was silent for a few moments, and then John's humiliation became clear. He had no way out. John sat there, his confidence evaporating as each piece of evidence against him was laid bare. Every document Amelia presented felt like another blow, pushing him deeper into the trap he'd set for himself. He tried to keep his composure, but his eyes betrayed the fear and guilt now consuming him. Sarah remained steady, her gaze fixed on him. The woman he had underestimated throughout their marriage was now standing tall, stronger than ever, holding the reins of the situation. John finally understood what had happened. She had known everything from the start. And the worst part, she had orchestrated his downfall with precision, without him even realizing it. The judge, noticing the growing tension in the room, finally called for silence. John attempted to defend himself, his voice faltering as he tried to justify the unjustifiable. "It's not how it looks. I didn't know." His words came out stammered, shaky. He knew there was no excuse for what he had done, but he still tried, desperately, to salvage what was left of his dignity. Then Sarah stood up. Calmly, she took the floor. The rage that had once burned inside her had now transformed into a cold certainty. She wasn't there for revenge, she was there for justice. With a firm voice, she laid out everything John had done, exposing his greed, his betrayal, and how he had tried to leave her with nothing. "You underestimated me, John," she began, her voice carrying a quiet strength. "You thought I'd be easy to fool, that I wouldn't know how to stand up for myself. But what you didn't realize was that, while you were scheming in the shadows, I was always one step ahead of you. What you built with lies and greed crumbles in front of you today." The silence in the courtroom was deafening. John, with nothing left to say, slumped in his chair. He was defeated. The humiliation of seeing his plan so publicly exposed crushed him. His vision of a new life, free and full of wealth, dissolved before his eyes. The judge finally rendered the decision. Not only was Sarah entitled to half of all John's assets, but she was also awarded financial compensation for the damages he had caused. The offshore account would be frozen, and the money would be fairly divided. John left that courtroom not with the freedom he had dreamt of, but with a financial and emotional punishment he had never seen coming. As he left the courtroom, head down, Sarah remained standing. She felt a mix of relief and pain. Relief for having achieved justice, but pain at seeing the man she once loved become someone she barely recognized. John walked away with the weight of failure on his shoulders, his arrogance shattered, his life in ruins. The plan he thought was foolproof had crumbled before his eyes, and now he was facing the consequences of his greed. Sarah, however, didn't revel in her victory. What filled her wasn't vengeance, but a sense of justice and renewal. She hadn't just reclaimed what was rightfully hers. She had restored something much deeper, her dignity, knowing that even in the face of betrayal, she stayed true to her values. She glanced at Amelia, who smiled back with a sense of shared triumph. Sarah knew that without her niece's strength and determination, she might never have had the courage to see it through. Now, with the victory in hand, Sarah didn't just want to rebuild her own life. She wanted to help other women who, like her, had been underestimated. Without John's fortune, Sarah would still have enough to start over. She decided to use part of the money to support women in similar situations. Those who, like her, had been deceived or manipulated but needed help to get back on their feet. Sarah's act went beyond personal justice. It was a declaration that power doesn't lie in wealth, but in the courage to fight for what's right. As she left the courthouse, the air felt lighter. The weight of the last few months, the uncertainty and fear, had finally lifted. Sarah was ready to begin again, with dignity and the certainty that, no matter what John had tried to do, she had stood firm, stronger and wiser than ever. Today, we saw how greed and betrayal can destroy everything a person has built. John thought he could deceive Sarah, but he underestimated her intelligence and determination. The truth, as always, found a way to emerge, and justice prevailed. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notifications bell for more videos like this. Leave a like and share your thoughts so more people can discover Sarah's story and how the truth always wins in the end. And if you haven't seen our last story, click on the video that's popping up on the screen now. I'm sure you'll love it. Thanks for watching until the end. Don't miss our next stories.